Good afternoon, everybody, and a very warm welcome to this series finale episode of This is Simulation. If this is your first episode joining us, a very warm welcome to you. If you're returning, an extra warm welcome to you. Thank you for joining us for more than one episode. This is a brand new web series brought to you by Sim & Skills, which champions the latest innovations in healthcare simulation. If you've missed any of the previous 5 episodes, you can watch them back now. I'm just going to pop a little link into the chat so you can take a look after this episode and watch back. We've had episodes about AI, using technology at the right time, accessing meta-humans for patient communication, lots and lots of different approaches to simulation that you can dive into. So I'm Nicola, and I'm your host for this series, and I've got the amazing task of being able to introduce you to our wonderful guests. Each of our speakers in this series works in a different area of healthcare simulation, in different job roles. They're going to share the work that they do with practical insights that you can take back to your own organisation. Before we get underway with today's episode, just a few housekeeping things for you. It would be great to hear where you're joining us from today. I know we've got people all over the world that have signed up for this webinar. If you just pop in the chat where you're joining us from, just make sure the little blue tag is switched from hosts and panelists to everyone so that everybody can see you on there. Yeah, let us know where you're joining us from today. It'd be great to hear from you. If you've got a question today for our guest, if you could pop it in the Q&A section, there's a separate little box for Q&A. It just allows us to see questions and they don't get lost in the chat. But if it ends up in the chat, that's fine as well. This session today is going to be recorded. So if you want to share it with your team or you need to jump off at any point, don't worry. The recording is going to be emailed out to you tomorrow. So you'll get the copy from it then. Hi, Lucy. Hi, Agnes. Hi, Pramod. Great to see you in the chat there. So on to today's session. So I'm very pleased and excited to be joined by Lynsey McLeish. So Lynsey is the head of skills and simulation, Buckinghamshire New University. So Lynsey has a military nursing background, which she's going to talk to us a little bit about this afternoon. And she's worked for the RAF as an intensive care nurse. It was during her time with the RAF that Lynsey first dived into healthcare simulation and developed high-fidelity simulation programs for multidisciplinary teams. In today's episode, she's going to talk to us about how she's developed simulated practice learning at her university. Her team have been practicing SPL for a little while now, and she's going to share her experiences with us, some of the things that she's tried and tested and where she's had successes. So hopefully you're going to find it really, really interesting. Again, if you've got any questions, pop them in the Q&A or in the chat and we can put those to Lynsey at the end. So it gives me great pleasure to welcome Lynsey to This is Simulation. Welcome to today's session, Lynsey.
Thank you so much. I'm just going to share my screen with everybody. We've just had a practice of this, haven't we? Let me just get this going. Share this. And then if I share this. Hopefully you can see that. Oh, I can see a thumbs up. Perfect. Firstly, thank you so much to the Skills and Simulation team for having me and to be a part of your webinar series. It's a real pleasure to be here today. And my main goal for this session for everybody is just to share, literally to share my journey, the lessons I've learned and how I've built a sustainable and scalable model of a simulated practice learning placement at BNU. Because I just know firsthand how resource intensive delivering SPL is. And it can be, and I know a lot of us are facing the same challenges within the sector. So my hope is that you'll walk away today looking at the last 12 months of work that we've been delivering to get your creative juices like flowing on how you could deliver this within your own university, if you're or HI sector, wherever you're in. So yeah, hopefully give you the tools to go and think about how you can make your life slightly easier. To be able to deliver what we are currently delivering at BNU. I'm going to talk to you about the challenges I faced on the way. There's no secrets here. I'll tell you everything where we've struggled and how we've overcome some of our problems that we faced, okay? Just so you know, I'm always happy to share any of my resources. I have a very open approach, so even after this series, I'll share with you all my email address. I'm happy to share with you lesson plans, example timetables, because I know it's such a big logistical beast on how we've delivered this. So, as Nicola said, just a little bit about my background. So I was in the Royal Air Force basically for 13 years, and my role within the Royal Air Force was I was an ITU specialist nurse, and I retrieved intensive care patients from around the world, and brought them back to Birmingham Hospital. I'd obviously deployed into lots of hot and sunny places as well, such as your classic Afghanistan's, Iraq, deployed with the Navy. So I've got like a real mixed experience of where I've been deployed, but I also, when I wasn't deployed or I wasn't doing my role of CCAST, which is that critical care support team, I worked heavily within the NHS. So you'll see military nurses, and some of you probably in the hospital trust that you've worked in previously have worked with military nurses. So when we're not deployed, we would work within the NHS as military nurses and work alongside the NHS colleagues to obviously just keep our skills up. I was heavily, massively involved during the COVID pandemic, part of the quick reaction force. So I went off doing the vaccinating up the Northwest, and I worked, most of my clinical practice has been in the John Radcliffe in Oxford. And I also supported the London Ambulance Service at the Nightingale Hospital we basically gave them a load of our equipment, such as our ventilators and stuff, and I went to train the people how to do that. So what I'm going to cover within this session today is my simulation journey from CCAST to academia, because I've only been out of the military about 3 years now, and how I built a sustainable and simulated practice learning placement model at BNU, and the technology I've used as well, such as Oxford Medical Simulation and Sim EPR. Okay, and I'm going to talk to you about the student feedback from this and the next steps on where I see us going forward. So just some nice little clips there of about simulation in defence, and which basically gave me the foundations of my practice. Okay, so like I said, I spent 13 years doing this, and I was the lead instructor for CCAST training. So this is how I got into sort of education. I was responsible for the training of the CCAST team, which include a multidisciplinary team. So we went to retrieve patients as a team of 6. Okay, so it'd be consultant anaesthetists, registrars, ITU nurses, a medic, which is a bit equivalent to the healthcare sort of assistant role that you know within the sort of NHS. And we also would take equipment technician with us, because of course, if our ventilator was to fail in flight, that's a drama. That's a long bag on the way home. So we would also take our technicians with us as well. And that's how we would deploy to retrieve our patients. And then, as you can see in the little video there, that's a clip of us doing a training session. So we would actually fly on live aircraft to train our teams on how to do this role. And it was all high fidelity simulations, how we delivered it. What we also did was facilitated monthly assurance simulations as well. So the oncoming team, because as I said, we worked within the NHS, a lot of the teams were spread out. So they never worked together before, such as consultant anaesthetists might not have worked with that nurse. So we would massively home in on human factors and team dynamics as well. And they would have an exercise before they come and they sort of deployed. So we did that again with all high fidelity simulation, and we would take them up in aircraft to be able to do that. And one of the big things that I was a part of when I was in the sort of training role was I redesigned the course to a hybrid model. And that's what sort of gave me the idea to do what I'm currently delivering at BNU. So it was to be able to accelerate deployment readiness. So it used to be a 7-day course, and I got it down to 4 days because I created an online package, which is what I have done with BNU as well. Because a lot of the training we need to deliver within this training was about like equipment, how to use ventilators, how to use our monitoring systems, which you can deliver a lot of that, online. So that's how we did it. And then we would just test them practically when they would come to us, if you like, on the exercises and stuff and within the training. So that's what we did. One of the other things I was heavily involved with as well, which will come on to how I've designed the sort of practical ward element that we do at BNU, is HOSPEX, which was our hospital exercise. And you can see a picture of that in that top right corner. So it was basically a large scale field hospital simulation, and it was set out as Camp Bastion Hospital as the role 3. So before we would deploy to Afghanistan, we would go here and we would deliver trauma master casualty scenarios through this, which would have, we'd have live actors in there. It was all done by a moulage. So to give us again that opportunity to work together as a team before we deployed. So that's how we would deliver that as well. So yeah, so that's what I did. So my foundations for how I now deliver my practice within at BNU. So my military background massively taught me about simulation isn't just about practice, it's about preparing people to make life or death decisions under pressure. Okay, obviously sounds quite dramatic, but whether in an aircraft or on a ward, high fidelity simulation provides or can provide that psychological safe environment where mistakes become learning opportunities. So when designed well, we know it pushes learners to think critically, act confidently, and respond to the unexpected. But it must reflect, real world clinical settings as closely as possible, not just in terms of equipment, but in the atmosphere and the structure. So that's how I kind of, I'm hoping if I share with how my mind works with you, you'll understand for some of the reasons on what the decisions I've made here at BNU. So from CCAST, obviously, to the classroom. So like I say, my transition from the military into academia wasn't just about changing roles. It was about carrying forward that mindset that I had developed within the military. As I said, in CCAST and the HOSPEC, simulation was not like a nice to have, it was an essential. It was simply, it wasn't simply a teaching technique, it was a strategic training tool that prepared people for high stakes environment. And I want to do that for our pre-registration, mainly talking about obviously student nurses here, but I'll also come on to talk to how I've been doing this as well with the other interprofessional team members as well. And this mindset has absolutely shaped how I now approach simulation in higher education, okay? It's about replacing real world complexity with enough safety to allow mistakes, reflection, of course, ultimately growth. That's what we're trying to do, right? So I make sure that the simulation, the structure, realism, and formal debriefing we use in the military is often in very tense or emotional contexts. Now they form the backbone of how I deliver the SPL activities. And above all, I try to create environments that are psychological safe, where students feel they can try and fail and learn without fear. Okay, so I don't want to say I pressurize my students, but I do, for example, put them in maybe scenarios that they're not as likely to be exposed to. So for example, there's me in the top delivering simulation to one of the assurance teams, CCAST team, and then at the bottom, that's actually a group of year one student nurses where I'm delivering an ALS scenario and getting them to deliver that ALS scenario themselves. So it's just about that little bit of stretch. So anybody who's on the call today who's not quite sure what I'm sort of referring to, what simulate and practice learning is. So basically, the NMC now permanently allow up to 600 hours of simulated practice learning within that total of 2,300 hours, practice hours that we know our nursing students need to achieve to become qualified. And this is a major shift. So simulation is no longer just an ad hoc educational tool, but it's formal practice learning that counts towards qualification. And it's not just treated as a standalone skills labs anymore. It must be contextualized, as we know. We can't just, get someone to do a skill. It's got to be contextualized, supervised, and assessed like any clinical placement. And it's multi-modal, so we can involve VR, simulated wards, actors, digital tools, and immersive environments. And it crucially, SPL sorts the key pillars of practice learning, such as that repetition, feedback, and reflection in a safe environment. So of course, while SPL offers huge potential, I'm pretty sure most of you, or some of you, have maybe joined this call today because you know it's challenging, you know it's difficult. How can I do this within your HEI? Because of all the things that I'm going to talk about here, we know, it's very resource intensive, okay? It's people being, confident to be able to deliver SPL, such as debriefing and stuff. And it's not something that everybody within their, when maybe they did their nurse training, was getting all the time. So this is why I'm going to talk to you about the challenges, sorry. There are like real challenges in delivering it, as I said. The most pressing driver, of course, is the ongoing pressure for NHS placements. With more students, obviously, more structured services, it's no longer realistic to rely on traditional placements alone. That's why we know, the NMC are very supportive of SPL, okay? However, shifting some of that learning into simulation-based environments requires time, expertise, and confidence, and not just faculty is set up for, not every faculty, I should say, is set up for that. And we know many academics feel underprepared to facilitate simulation run debriefs, as I've just discussed, or especially when simulation wasn't part of their own training. Then there's the issue with consistency. We can't have a situation where SPL is only high quality in pockets. Of course, we need to be delivering this, across the board. And it needs to be reliable and accessible and professionally delivered, okay? Whether a student is on campus or online or in a satellite location, there must be a key driver in the hybrid model where that has what's been a key driver in the hybrid model we've developed at BNU, which I'll come on to shortly and really break it down on how we've delivered that, okay? Whilst like I said to you, there's going to be no secrets here. Whilst I'm incredibly proud of what we've built at any BNU, I want to be honest about the challenges behind the scenes. It's not been easy, especially when you don't have the infrastructure in place. Okay. At BNU, we're working with very large student cohorts, and I should imagine lots on this call are, which makes logistics incredibly complex. We know it's resource intensive by nature. It takes time to plan, space to deliver, and people to run it safely and effectively. And unlike many institutions, I don't have a simulation team. Okay. I've relied heavily on goodwill, and I'm sure quite a few of you might be in this position. I've relied heavily on goodwill and commitment of a few of my colleagues, many of whom already have full workloads. They're already delivering on modules and stuff already, aren't they? And then you come up to them and say, "Oh, do you want to come and help me work in this, simulated ward 9 till 5?" Absolutely not. So it's difficult, isn't it? And one of the biggest barriers wasn't just practical, it was also the culture, which I know when I've been at lots of simulation meetings as well, people speak about this culture, okay? There was a need to shift the mindset that simulation was extra or optional, that it wasn't this, okay? And instead to see it is that it's now an essential curriculum which has been integrated into our practice learning. And progress has been slow. I've only been in this position about 18 months now, and we've only been delivering SPL since April last year. So, just a year now. But after every successful session and every bit of student feedback, every supportive colleague reminds me that it's worth it. But it's important to acknowledge that innovation often comes with friction, and change. People don't like change. We know that, don't we? We all get a bit bogged down in our own pressures and what we need to do. So I've tried to really create a model that is pick off the shelf, that people can just, if I was to fall down a hole, someone could pick off the shelf and go and deliver that, which is what we'll come on to discuss. So a little bit about our journey. Okay, I'm going to talk to you about how I originally started with my different models to where I've got to now. Okay. So we delivered our first SPL in April, as I said, during a 1-week release from clinical placement. Okay, so these were year 1 students. They were already in practice. Okay, and I took them out of practice to come to BNU for a week. The good thing about this cohort that I first trialed, which actually felt quite nice, was they were a smaller cohort. Our January cohort does tend to be smaller than our September cohort. So it was a good one to pilot with. And how we did this was we had 15 students per group, and we did this over 3 weeks. So I would bring 15 students in a week over the 3 weeks, if that makes sense. And they were timetabled Monday to Friday, 9 till 5. And we gave them 40 hours, so 37.5 clinical simulation hours, if you like. And then we gave them 2.5 hours to go and do a structured reflection that they had to submit to us. Okay. What else do I want to say about that? What made this placement particularly powerful was the narrative thread. Everything revolved around one patient, this Mrs. Anderson scenario that I made, whose journey the students followed from the hospital admission through to the end of life care. So it was really important because we know the NMC about keeping it contextualized. So everything that we incorporated was around this one scenario, such as ATE assessment. Well, it was ATE assessment on Mrs. Anderson, their personal hygiene. Now they already had this skills training, so they already knew how to bed bath a patient. So what we would get them to do within the scenario, Mrs. Anderson was in the bed, they would be expected to go and deal with Mrs. Anderson's personal hygiene. Okay, and there would be a facilitator in the room to help support them, any questions and things like that, as you would a practice supervisor in placement. So that's how they did it. It was designed to mirror real placement encounters, so to give students that confidence and preparation in a low risk environment. Okay. And also the use of OMS. So I used Oxford Medical Simulation from the get-go. Also brought in an extra dimension to the experience, giving students repeated that safe exposure to clinical scenarios. And I'll come in to break down about OMS a little bit later and how I use that as well. So the student reflections on our first SPL, so we did it in this sort of week, it was overwhelmingly positive. The thing is, I think with any SPL that you deliver to students, they love it because it's doing the job. Does that make sense? They're literally doing hands-on the job that they want to be best prepared for to go into practice. They really appreciate the small group sizes, which was obviously really important. They felt they had the opportunity to ask questions, that lots of hands-on sort of, because they were in those smaller groups, and immersive nature of the sessions. A lot we're talking about was the best week they'd ever had at university so far, and felt so much more ready for practice now. But one of the feedback was, I wish I had this before our first day out on placement, because of course, I'm pulling them out. So say, for example, group 3, I didn't pull them out until, their third week of already being in practice already. So, I really took that feedback on board. The challenges I identified with this model, it was very resource intensive. Skills labs were blocked for 3 consecutive weeks. So any of the courses that needed to get in made it difficult, and had limited staff availability. Me asking for staff 9 till 5, for 3 weeks like that, it's a lot, isn't it? So I needed to find a way to be able to make it more scalable, and this wasn't scalable for large cohorts. Okay, so I recognize that very from the get-go, that this was just not going to be the way going forward, unfortunately. So I had this group in again in November. And then what I did for these, when I spoke to you about the thing that I did in the military, HOSPEX, where we would run this full sort of ward scenario, I did this for this group of students. Okay, so we called it the Uxbridge Ward. And I wanted to try this with them, knowing that I was probably going to combine the 2 models from what I'd created from the first week to this week, of a bit more of that sort of. So the first week was more sort of micro simulation, I'd call, where this was a full ward running Monday to Thursday, 9 till 5, where what I basically did is we had a full functioning ward, but to keep the students small in their groups still, I basically duplicated the 2 bays. So it was the same group of scenario patients in bay 1, if you like, as in bay 2. But they were split down, so you could have 8 students per bay. We had 1 shift coordinator per bay, while the remaining students worked in pairs to manage the patients. I use this patient tracker that you can see in the corner there of the injects to help people who weren't, because we know that some people within simulation are happy just to go, oh, that patient just fell on the floor, and just be able to manage that on their own. But I wanted all the staff to feel supported, that there was this tracker here, and once they would click onto the inject details, it would tell them actually what they needed to do step by step to be able to run that inject. Okay, and it would be things like desaturation of a patient. Remember, nothing too complicated, because these were year 1 students. Okay, this was like their second placement at this point. So that's how we delivered that. Okay. Of course, we wanted to mirror real world dynamics, as I spoke about. So we had a shift coordinator in each bay, which took charge of handovers. There was feedback from staff members actually saying, was this a bit much for year 1 students? They'd only been on 1 placement, but the students fed back, which I'll come on to talk about the feedback, how they felt like real nurses, and they were getting their opportunity to practice. And of course, we kept how we sort of managed this to their skills levels, that we kept the scenarios quite basic at their levels. Just maybe a desaturation, we'd expect them to put some oxygen on. We weren't, or they would go in, raise the concern to the doctor and talk about escalation and stuff like that. So we kept the sort of clinical side of it quite basic, but there were injects on, like, you could see one of them there, misplaced medication. What would they do about that? How would they deal with that sort of situation? An upset staff member because someone arrived late back from break and stuff like that. They were the sort of injects we put in for them, nothing too clinically taxing. Basically, the goal here was to increase that realism and that team-based functioning, and give students a deep immersive ward experience without the pressure of being in the real clinical placement. So that really worked for them. Reflections on that ward model, and you can see how it was sort of running there. It's by far my favourite model for student learning and realism, without a shadow of a doubt. I just felt the students were really engaged with it all. I think it gave them the best sort of experience and also educational value with it. And I think the setup created a deeply immersive real-time ward environment where students worked as a functioning team. It was really fascinating to see the students grow throughout the week, how they, were putting their hands up, well, can I coordinate today and stuff, which I thought was brilliant. And like I said, keeping it quite basic in the sort of clinical skill set we expected them to do. What I really loved, which really helped, was it actually required less staff than my earlier SPLP model, because all I would have, as you can see in this bay here, so this was a 4-bedded bay, was 1 facilitator in that bay managing it, because they had my inject tracker. They could just look at the injects, so what I've designed for that day, and they could just manage that themselves. And then what I would do is I would act as the runner between the 2 bays, and obviously I knew what scenarios was happening in the same bay. And then I was able to go in and I'd act as the ward consultant to keep the simulation moving. So, I would go in there and do discharges, and all that sort of side of things. So that's how I made that work, and do like the ward rounds and things to keep the simulation moving. So that worked really, it was really effective. The other thing to say, like I said, the students were really engaged. They felt it was a first time being a nurse. This was also where the point that I brought in SimEPR, which I'm going to come and talk about how that massively really helped me deliver a model like this if you're thinking of doing something similar in your HEIs. Students were able to complete digital documentation just as they would in placement and given them that authentic experience. I also, with the facilitators as well, I was very mindful. I didn't want to, you know, sort of micromanage or underpin anyone's sort of, you know, undermine, should I say, anyone's clinical practice. If they were happy to go and throw in a random inject, I let them do that. Do you know what I mean? As long as they were thinking about also psychological safety within simulation, they absolutely had free rein to manage these 4 patient scenarios. So what I wanted to touch on here is SimEPR. Let me start by saying this isn't a sales pitch. I don't work for SimEPR, but honestly, I couldn't recommend it enough on how much this really helped me deliver something like Uxbridge Ward, okay? It completely transformed the ward experience for me. It didn't just enhance the realism for the students, it also made my life so much easier. Because you'll know yourself, when you're designing something like a ward, you need to create all those paper notes, you need to create the drug chart, you know, and all that. SimEPR does it for you as quick as anything, which is just brilliant. I can build the entire scenario digitally, and then I also use a lot of AI with this as well. So I would use things like Copilot and stuff to create the scenarios for me and to create for me, for example, like the you know, once I'd done the ward rounds as a consultant, so they could go and create that note, I could then upload it on there. It was amazing. It allowed me to sort of give them blood results without me having to think about, you know, like a respiratory acidosis for them. It would generate it all for me. It's just, you know, I would definitely write this down if you write any notes. SimEPR if you want to create something like the Uxbridge Ward. It's a fantastic digital tool. And another reason why I brought it in is because I did have feedback from our practice partners about how our students weren't digitally ready to go into practice, and this really does support them with this. You know, so I couldn't recommend that enough. Not that I work for them, if that makes sense. Anyway, my next challenge that I had was, as I said to you, I kept talking about the scalability. Okay, I knew on the horizon coming in was I was having a cohort of 183 students. I'd already recognised that it was difficult to be delivering this over 3 weeks because of staff burnout. They obviously were having to teach on other modules. So I wanted to deliver this over 1 week, but also now I had to deliver this over 3 campuses because we're at 3 campuses, okay? So I had to think of a model how I was going to be able to deliver this. And one of the big things as well, because it's so hard, isn't it? You know, when you deliver something that the students are absolutely rating and loving, you don't want to you don't want to sort of, you know, dilute that, do you? You still want to produce a product like that, okay? So I knew that I had to obviously try and do this. And the other thing that I was doing, if you think about the model that I was delivering before, where I was actually taking them out of practice, I'm not actually reducing placement capacity, am I? Because that placement still needs to hold that gap for that student, where if I could shorten the placement, say, for example, put this week at the beginning before they go into placement, I am slightly reducing placement capacity, say, for example, from 6 weeks to a 5-week placement, okay? So I also wanted to do that to ease the pressure on the system. And then I knew that eventually, if this works, I could then do that even further, that maybe I could do this at the beginning of 2 weeks of a placement or something like that, okay? And I wanted to really prepare students for practice as well, okay? Because I had that feedback saying, oh, I wish I had this prior to me going into placement. So this is why I built what I built with this, okay? So, introducing the hybrid model is what I designed. So this is where I really saw this model evolve, okay? So to meet this challenge of 183 students across 3 campuses in just 1 week, this is where this hybrid model came out, that it's a blended in-person simulation with structured online learning, okay? On one of the models, I had done an online day, and the feedback from that online day was, because these are first year students, and I think it's really important to say, I don't think this would, if you're thinking about doing something like this for maybe stage 2 or stage 3 students, they felt like they really struggled with that self-directed study, for me just to go off and say, oh, just go and do this. They really struggled with that element of it. So I went to design something that meant that they had more structured online sort of teaching to help them with this, okay? So basically it was delivered again. So obviously I split them into 12 groups, and it was a mixture of face-to-face simulation, online remote learning activities across the 5 days. But I still wanted to keep the group sizes small because that's what the students had loved. Okay, so it was still 16 students per group, but then I broke them down even further. So for example, I gave you a little one here. So groups 1 to 2 at High Wycombe participated online sessions, so that's great. I just need one facilitator to look after them. And while groups 1 to 3 were at Uxbridge engaged to face-to-face simulation, they were split even further. So then in the skills lab, I would have like group 1 and 1, group 2 and another, and group 3. So they were still getting that small group element, okay? But I was able to manage some of this delivery while some students were being online, okay? And again, I focused on that one patient model of Mrs. Anderson, like the first run of SPL. And I included Oxford Medical Simulation, and I also created an e-learning package, which I'm going to come on to show you how I did that. And again, this was now reducing placement capacity, which was brilliant. Okay, we were freeing up capacity by 1 week, and which is, what we want to do. And of course, guys, let's not beat around the bush. This also generates tariff for us as well, doesn't it? So this is what the week looked like. Okay, obviously, depending on the group, you were getting these activities on different days. Okay, but you can see roughly what one of the timetables looked like. So on the Monday, they had that basic nursing skills sort of day, like what I did on the first run. So ATE assessment, personal care, all around this Mrs. Anderson again, keeping it all contextualized, okay, within within scenario, okay. So we wouldn't be showing them how to do personal care. They've had that training. They now need to go and deliver personal care for Mrs. Anderson, all right. And then the Tuesday was the online e-learning package, which I'll come on to a bit more. Then this was another on-campus day. So you can see I did, oh, sorry, that should say online. I actually did 2 days on campus, three days online. Hopefully that makes sense, but I'll show you now. I'll break it down better here for you. So this was the basic nursing skills day. So this is what it looked like. And you can see here where I've split the groups down. Okay. And I'm just going into a bit more detail here to help you with your planning if you're thinking of doing something like this. All right. So we've focused on grounding those core nursing skills, as I sort of spoke about. We'd give a full handover in the morning of Mrs. Anderson, say what happened, overnight and stuff like that. Which set the tone for the day and allowed them to understand Mrs. Anderson's background. Now, again, with Mrs. Anderson, remember these are stage 1 students, so very simple. She was COPD, I'm sure she was. She was COPD, nothing too complicated, okay. And then all activities were framed around this single unfolding case to keep everything contextualized, and they followed this case throughout the week, all right. And I feel this really helped with the student learning engagement because they really could just focus on this sort of one patient. And you can see the sort of stuff we covered there: personal care, oral medication, okay, and obviously debrief and reflection at the end. So then this is the big thing that I went to create, because I said to you, didn't I got feedback about students feeling they couldn't cope with that sort of self-directed study. So I created this online package, all right. And how I did this is something called articulate storyline. So you might have this within your HEIs, and the good thing about it incorporates into Blackboard, okay. So this was basically an online learning day. So I'm not going to lie, this was very time consuming to do this. This was a very interactive e-learning so all of these, where you can see where I wrote e-learning module, this was one on communication skills, there's one on medication administration. So they were separate little e-learning packages that was linked to Blackboard that they would go on and they would do these e-learning. It was very time consuming to create this. Again, if you've got a team within you could obviously set someone off to go in and create these sort of sessions for you as well, and you could take one each. But I ended up doing a lot of this because my poor guys that come and help me, they're busy on the module teaching. So I went and created all these sort of and this is what it looks like, a snapshot. What I also incorporated, as you can see there, was SIM-EPR. Okay, so when they did the drug assessment, I screenshotted the drug chart that they were using, again, to keep it all contextualized, that they were using Mrs. Anderson into this online module, so they could get used to looking at the drug chart of how it would look like when they come onto the wall, back into the classroom in the sim lab, should I say, what it would look like. So we got them to do that as well. And then they were required throughout the day to submit certain work onto Blackboard. What we had, which was really important to make sure we're keeping that practice supervised relevant as the requirement from the NMC, I had a Teams chat open all day. Okay, so they would join the Teams meeting in the morning, and then they would go off and do these sessions, and then they would come back. Okay, so like at 11:30, once they've done these sessions, they would come back and have the debrief, but also they could come into that Teams chat at any point during the day to ask for any if they had any questions or anything like that as well. So they always had that sort of practice supervisor support. Okay. And then one of the sessions we did was facilitated, which was that professionalism and teamwork on that. And that started with a bit of a quiz about what professionalism and teamwork was. And then we sent them off in breakout rooms where they dealt with more of those sort of simulated we'd give them sort of simulated scenarios, such as dealing with like maybe I think one of them was Mrs. Anderson's relative being a bit difficult, how they would, and they would discuss that as a team on how they would manage that. We did like unethical dilemmas, such as performing with an unfamiliar procedure, if like the nurse asked them to go and do that and they're a student nurse and so they've not had that training. So we brought all that into there as well. And again, this was probably one of my best fed back days, because I think because they were year one students, I think it really worked for them to be able to work at their own pace. So they really liked that. So that was one of the days that we did. And like I say, it's called Articulate Storyline, if you're interested in this model that I created here. And then the next day was campus. Okay, so they would come in on campus again. And then these are some of the scenarios that what we did. We just basically upped it a bit. So they would get patient handover from when they looked after the first day. Okay, so they'd come back in. We did about like, basically we make this recognizing complications workshop. It was within the skills lab, and then we just made Mrs. Anderson deteriorate slightly. Again, nothing too complex. These are stage 1. So, you know, she desaturated. How would they manage that? Talking about escalation. And then they would go and manage that scenario. And again, we would have one of the facilitators, you know, acting as a doctor example like that. So, but you can see here what we did, you know, they were still in those small groups. So you could see that we split these 2 groups down. So there was one person in each lab, like so. And then it was really important to bring in end of life care. And that was from my own sort of reflecting. And when I was a student nurse, I remember the first time I ever looked after a patient with end of life care was actually in practice. So we actually got them to actually perform last officers here on Mrs. Anderson. Had a really good debrief about that at the end as well. And that was really effective as well. So that's what we did. And this SFAR was them handing over from this recognition, basically handing over and writing an SFAR and, you know, doing some documentation on looking after the patient. And again, we use SimEPR to do all of this. And then this was the Oxford Medical Simulation Day that we did. So from my first run, all I did, which was a lesson learn, if anyone's going to put OMS out to a big group of students, I just did their 2 hours of onboarding. And then I was like, right, and then the next day you'll come online and we'll do it all online. That didn't really work for those students because even though I told them to bring their own laptops, I helped them do all the onboarding and everything. They really struggled with it still the minute I put them online the next day. So I made the decision from my first run of SPL to do a full day on campus like this. So basically I onboarded them in the morning and then we did guided scenarios together. So we did the scenario together and then we would do the full patient debrief, etc. around that scenario. We've also, as you can see in that, we've got an immersive room. So I also put OMS on that as well. So they were able to have a little go at using it on the immersive room as well, just so, you know, just to make it a bit more different. And then what I would do, I would then send them off throughout those blocks of, you know, that guided that say they're doing scenario 1, they could go off into the IT suite, do the scenario and come back and then get to practice loads as well. So this just gave them a really good basis before I put them online the next day to do OMS on their own, if that makes sense. I could make sure they were savvy on their IT and that then they knew how to, you know, really use OMS. Of course, if you've already got OMS prior to them coming on the SPL, you wouldn't need to do maybe a full day like this. They were probably a bit more confident using it, but our learners weren't, they hadn't had OMS until this point. And like I say, then this was the online day. So then we had a day online. Again, the same, to make sure we're still doing that practice supervisor element. We had a Teams chat open all day. Okay, so Teams chat was open. They could come on. We would give them the scenario that we wanted them to go and do. And then they would come back and then they would do the debrief together as a team. And we would give them a score that we wanted them to achieve as well. So we would they would have the opportunity to do that. How I would go on from this, which is I've done a different day, which was interprofessional learning, which I'm going to talk about, where I used Oxford Medical Simulation, their create module, where you can create the scenarios yourself. So to make this even more contextualized, in the future, I'm going to create Mrs. Anderson on OMS. So then they can go and, you know, still use Mrs. Anderson with OMS, if that makes sense, as opposed to you know, me just giving them random scenarios on there that were still contextualized, because I'd still make sure, you know, I gave them, because Miss Anderson did have COPD, I gave them the respiratory scenario and stuff like that. But to keep it even more, you can absolutely design the patient so she was, you know what I'm trying to say. So it's still contextualized. I didn't really go into what Oxford Medical Simulation was, but just, I probably should have, but just to say, it's just basically a virtual reality platform, and you can, it's a bit like Sims. they probably won't like me saying that, but it is a bit, it's a bit like, you know, you get presented with a patient and you click around and you can test the students on their clinical reason and their clinical decision making. But go and have a look at this time. I won't be able to cover what OMSs as well, but that's what I used. So the feedback on the hybrid simulation module model was, you know, amazing. It still maintained that small group size face to face in the simulation suites, because I was having obviously some online, some in the suites. I won't lie, it was a bit of a logistical beast. If you imagine, I've got 12 groups at one over 3 campuses on how I manage that. But like I say, I'm more than happy to share people with them templates on my timetables and how I did it, if this helps anybody, because I know it's just, it did take a bit of brain power, me thinking, well, that group will be there, so that can do this, if that makes sense. So it massively reduced staff resourcing, because obviously when I had, you know, if I had 3 groups online at one time, that's like what, yeah, quick maths, I don't know, 50 students. They were able to, you know, I just needed one facilitator for 50 students. So it massively helped me with that. I was able to deliver it across 1 week, okay, and it supported that digital readiness as well, and those clinical reasonings that I spoke about by still using something like SimEPR. And yeah, they really loved that e-learning package, which I spoke about, and they thought it was really interactive. That again, you know, and I'm just saying about that because that was a bit time consuming. So if you are thinking about moving to a model like that, you know, that did take a little bit of time just to think about creating something like that. But again, happy to support and show people how I did that. Feel free to connect me on how I used that sort of platform. So of course, then I need to think about future plans. Okay. I do feel this is scalable. Okay. I could absolutely, you know, continue to do it in this format. But what I don't ever want to dilute, you know, that hands-on experience. As much as putting people online has a place, of course it does, and the only reason I like it is because it allows me to keep the group small, and obviously helps reduce resources. But I never really want to dilute like that learning experience. Okay, but this is how going forward. So this is now, because of course I've done stage 1, I need to think about what I'm going to do for stage 2. And the big thing, which I'm sure some of you will know, is that I really want to focus around Annex B proficiencies, getting some of those skills. We know our students feedback and struggle with, you know, getting their catheterization, their energy insertion. So what we would have, I want to combine those 2 sort of models. I want to have where they would have 2 face-to-face days in that Uxbridge ward where I'm still using SimEPR. They would still be managing the ward. And then within those, the scenarios that I would create would be around Annex B proficiency. So for example, you know, I'd make Mrs. Anderson need a catheter. They would have to go and deliver that. So I could still do that for them. I'd create an e-learning package again, so a separate one, which would be aimed at stage 2, okay? And again, around maybe Annex B proficiencies, but more around the sort of ethical sort of principles of doing that. So we'll again design that. Still use OMS face-to-face simulation at first. Only the reason why I say it for this group is because I know this group haven't had OMS yet, so this is for stage 2. So I would do that. This might change, you know, going forward. If I had a group that were confident with OMS, I might not do the face-to-face simulation. So this is that scalability. I can just amend it depending on my learners, and then another full day of that Uxbridge ward toward that face-to-face, sorry, Uxbridge, because you know, talking about that continued patient management, admissions and discharges, because I did see the most value in my students there. So that's how I'd want to deliver that. Yeah, and then Friday OMS online. But again, this is all scalable, and we can sort of change that as we go forward. So other future plans as well. If you have followed me on LinkedIn, you'll know that I delivered this recently as well, which was an interprofessional learning simulation day, where basically I brought paramedics, radiographers, midwives, was it ODPs? Yes, physician associates. We all came together and we basically did a road traffic collision scenario. So we got them all to work together as a team. We again split them in groups. It was like a round robin format. And then they followed the patient journey from the roadside into our new A&E department that we've got built at BNU. And you can see a little radiographer there in one of the A&E resource bays. And then we went on and did a bit of OMS with that as well. I also used OMS Create to copy the scenario from this RTC onto OMS Create, which again was really, really beneficial. The students loved it. And the reason why I brought this into this SPL, because my plan is for the student nurses that they would get SPL hours towards if they attend this this day as well. And again, about scalability on, we could expand, get more. And of course, we need to do this, you know, we need to do interprofessional learning. And this is just another, and again, if anyone's interested in a day like this, because I had 100 students go through in one day for this, I will, again, happy to share the template on how I did that in the round robin effect to help people manage this, because it is doable, you know, people just signed up and came along, which was really beneficial. And my plan is to incorporate some of this into the SPL as well. And that's it. Obviously, we're going to have some questions now. I'm sorry that if I've spoke really fast and raced through, I'm just conscious a lot of information to tell everybody. But like I said, I'm more than happy. Please to send me an email. We're all trying to do the same job. I'm not, I know people are a bit, oh, I don't want that university to copy what I'm doing. You can copy me because I know at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is we just want our students all ready for practice, okay, and feel most confident and build that confidence and competence in going into the clinical area. So I'm more than happy to share any of my resources and what I've done and managed to achieve. So, but yeah, I'm happy to go back to you.
Thank you so much, Lynsey. That was so fascinating. And thank you also not only for your sharing your experiences, but also sharing the challenges. It's really refreshing to hear the honesty, because I'm sure, and lots of people were commenting in the chat, that delivering SPL is incredibly beneficial to students, but it is also fraught with challenges as well. So yeah, it's really great to hear your honesty. We have got a couple of questions before we finish the session today, so I will just try and get to some of them. So the first question from Ellie, and this refers back to the simulated practice learning on the wards. She would like to know if all students are participating in the tasks or are some observing.
So this refers back to the ward, did we say?
Yes, yeah.
Yes. So what I did, so like I say, in one bay, so like I say, 2 bays are running at once. So we would put 8 students in a bay. So there would be one coordinator, and then I would team them up in a pair of 2 to look after that patient for the day. So 2 students would look after bed 1. So everybody was getting involved at the same time. I didn't even pause for like at university we pause for lunch so they can go off on their lunch. None of that. They had to cover each other's breaks, so they were always involved, if that makes sense, because I would make them split between us. Like, well, who's going to look after your patient when you go for break? So they were always really hands-on. So yeah, nobody observed in that ward. Everybody was sort of hands-on in that ward element.
Thank you very much, Lynsey. Agnes would like to know, were there any issues arising from having students who are perhaps at different levels of abilities, particularly when it comes to digital skills?
I think if I think about that in regards to sort of SIMI PR, okay, and again, not a salesperson, but when we talk about SIMI PR, it is so simple and easy to use that I didn't actually even give these students any training really how to use it. When they arrived on the first day, I literally shared SIMI PR, okay, shared it and just said, look, this is how you do it. This is how you find, your patient's notes. This is where you put their observations on. And then I basically allowed them to have the morning when they come onto the ward, I made that really sort of slow paced. So just to get them the opportunity to have a little go with using SIMI PR, I might then say to them, oh, can you just go and put the patient's observations on there for me, just to get them familiar using it. But I assure you, by sort of lunchtime, everyone was quite happy using SIMI PR. They became quite obsessed with SIMI PR. They wanted to do that more than their hands-on of, looking after the patient. So I didn't find any challenges. Was I lucky with that group of cohort? Maybe, but they were a real mix of, ethical backgrounds, different, ages and stuff. So, but I didn't actually notice anyone that sort of struggled sort of digitally in that sort of with that. And but coming back to Oxford Medical Simulation though, because that is another beast with, people's digital readiness. That's why, to be honest, I moved from where I said you didn't. In the first model, I just gave them the onboarding session for 2 hours. I did a full day face to face so I could really ensure that they were happy. And it was just with me in a classroom with them. They were really happy with OMS before I sent them off on the online. So I would say yes to your question on the first run, that maybe using OMS the way I did, where I just quick onboarding, send them off to go and do it the next day online, they struggled with. But the minute I put them, that full day, I think it got rid of all those problems. So I think it has just been responsive, and that's why it took a few runs to get to where we are and why I've made those sort of changes. So yeah, I hope that answers the question.
I'd like to know who the manufacturers of your immersive room. You showed us a shot of OMS in your immersive room earlier on.
Generate.
Awesome, thank you. So one other question just relating actually to Agnes's question about business literacy with the students. How did you find that with your staff? Was that an issue because you're embedding quite a lot of technology into this hybrid approach?
Like I said, because I don't at the moment, hopefully it's going to change. I don't have a simulation team. I to be honest, I wouldn't say the people that engaged with me, I felt earlier on for other projects, they were the ones that I tend to got involved with the SPL because I knew they were on board with innovation. They wanted to improve what we were currently doing. So I don't know if I was just lucky with the key people that got involved that they were okay, to pick up that technology. Because like you say, I did bring lots of stuff in, sim EPR and OMS, but I think because they saw the benefits of it, they engaged quite quickly. And the good thing was because I was always around and I was quite confident in that, I did put on some online sessions as well previously. When I come back to think about it now, I did do a couple of online sessions for the staff for them to join. If anyone who was coming to support the SPL who were unsure about using sim EPR, I did a recorded session and then sent it out to people. So I did do that as well. And I did offer people, like when the Oxford Medical Simulation, I tried to sort of manage that my sort of self because it is a bit more complex with the technical side of things. But I have got a few more key individuals now that will sort of engage. So yeah, I did put on some little online sessions, but especially something like SimEPI, it's so easy to pick up. They're just quite confident to get on with it, to be honest.
So Elena would like to ask, looking particularly at your stage 2 students and what you said about your future plans, looking at Annex B proficiencies, would it mean only 2 students get to address each proficiency, or will all 4 patients on the ward require a catheter, for example?
Yeah, it's a really good point, and I've really gave that a lot of thought. So what my plan is when I'm bringing this, I've been quite, I say clever, it's not clever, but with the stage 2, I've put their SPL, they're not having it at the beginning of their stage 2, they're having it towards the end of their stage 2. For the reason being is that I will hope that some of those students have already achieved those Annex B proficiencies. So say, for example, I will put out prior to the come in, I will get them to do a bit of a survey on what proficiencies they still need. So then if I know that there is a student, especially more, this is more aimed around the mental health students as well. If there is a student that, hasn't been able to do catheterization, don't get me wrong, I know they can still do it in stage 3, but they're really keen to get that skill signed off, or the cannulation, I would try and home in to make sure that they get that patient, who would need, a cannula and a catheter. So they would be the priority, the ones that haven't had it. But the other thing as well, the good thing is like with simulation, and if you're confident delivering simulation, if I see that there's maybe, if a student just happens to me to say, oh, I've not done, any cannulation yet, or I want to have another go, well, I'll just make the patient need a cannula. Do you know what I mean? So I can definitely adapt to that, if that makes sense. But yeah, really good point on, of course, I could not guarantee that every student, and as well, you watch them do that skill once. I might not be confident, to assess that student, go, yes, absolutely, you can go off and, cannulate, and I'm going to sign you off today. But it's just given them more the opportunity to practice. And of course, then at the end of the day, we could absolutely take them off and let them practice the skill a little bit more as well. But no, it's a really good point. You're absolutely right. You could never get everybody right. Definitely everyone's going to achieve, catheterization or cannulation throughout this. So yeah.
Thank you so much, Lynsey. I think that is all the time we've got for questions for today. Thank you, everybody, for submitting your questions, and a huge thank you to Lynsey for sharing her experiences with us today. The comments in the chat is overwhelmingly positive. Everybody is so grateful to hear from you and to hear from your experiences and all the different models that you are trialing, because I guess it's still a trial phase. You're iterating and changing things and developing things all the time, as I'm sure lots of HEIs are. Well, it's still quite a new process. So that's so beneficial to everybody. As Lynsey has said, she's very happy to connect with people. I am just hopefully going to share Lynsey's LinkedIn with you right now, so you can scan the QR code and connect with Lynsey. We will also, in the recording email that goes out to you tomorrow, we'll pop Lynsey's contact details in there as well, so that you can connect with Lynsey. As she said, she's really happy to hear from you and to, I guess, create that community of practice, which is what simulation is all about, really, to share all the ideas. Yeah, loads of thank yous going into the chat, Lynsey. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. This is the final episode of This is Simulation in this series. So if you want to catch up on any of the previous episodes, there's a link in the chat. There's lots of great experts just like Lynsey who've been sharing their experiences with everybody. So you can click the link in the chat or you can scan the code here and look at some previous episodes at your leisure. We're hoping to run series 2 later this year. So if you're interested in being a host, please do get in contact with us, marketing@simmonsskills.com. If you've got some innovative project that you're working on, a new technology that you're using, a new approach that you're trialing, and you'd love to share that with the simulation community, we would really love to hear from you and to get you on the next series. So yeah, once again, thank you so much to Lynsey for sharing her expertise with us today, and thank you everybody for taking the time to join us. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll see you soon.